I need to get this off my chest because what happened last Thursday has been building for literally 15 years and I'm finally watching it all collapse exactly the way I planned. Yeah, you read that right. Planned. This isn't some shocked guy processing betrayal. This is me executing something I've been preparing for since I was 19 years old. Let me start with Thanksgiving because that's what everyone's going to ask about first. I drove 6 hours to my parents' house in the suburbs like I do every year, knowing full well what I was walking into, but needing them to show their true colors one more time before I burned it all down. I'm 30 now, got a decent job in tech consulting, own my apartment outright, and I've spent the last decade deliberately building a life that looks successful enough to make them jealous while staying just connected enough that they think they can still use me. I walked in around 3 o'clock in the afternoon and immediately knew something was different. The house felt wrong. Lighter somehow. I headed upstairs to drop my overnight bag in my old room, and that's when I saw it. My childhood bedroom, the one that still had my name on a wooden plaque outside the door until last Christmas, was completely gutted. Boxes everywhere, Christmas decorations, old furniture, a literal storage unit. My mom, Mildred, came up behind me and just said it was time to be practical about space. They were redecorating, and there was no point keeping a shrine to someone who only visited twice a year anyway. She said it so casually, like she was discussing paint colors. I didn't react, just nodded and took my bag back downstairs to leave it by the front door. That's when I noticed the hallway walls. You know those family photo collages that every suburban house has? The ones that chart every graduation and vacation and milestone? I'd been systematically removed. Not recently either. This had been done carefully over time. My high school graduation photo was gone, but Reese was still there. The family beach trip from 2015 had been replaced with one from 2017 that I wasn't at. Every single picture that included me had either been taken down or cropped or replaced. I found the missing photos about an hour later when I took the kitchen trash out to the bins in the garage. Someone had torn them up, not carefully, just ripped them into pieces and thrown them away like junk mail. My college graduation. Me and Randy as kids. Me with Grandpa Maddox at his 75th birthday party. All of them shredded and sitting on top of some eggshells and coffee grounds. I stood there in the garage looking at my own face torn into strips and just thought, yeah, this is exactly what I needed. Confirmation, proof, the final piece of evidence that I wasn't crazy or sensitive or imagining things like they'd been telling me for years. I went back inside and Mildred was setting the table, talking about how nice it was that Ree's girlfriend couldn't make it this year, so it would just be family. Paula, my aunt, arrived with her husband, Lorenzo, and immediately started in on me about whether I was still doing that computer thing or if I'd gotten a real job yet. I told her I was senior consultant now, managing 3 accounts, and she actually laughed and said, "That's cute, honey. Ree's in medical sales and just bought a boat." Lorenzo joined in, saying, "At least Randy understood how to make real money, not just play with screens all day." Dinner itself was like watching a performance I'd seen 100 times before. Every single topic of conversation either excluded me completely or positioned me as the family disappointment. Randy talked about his sales numbers and everyone congratulated him like he'd cured cancer. Mildred brought up her friend's daughter who just made partner at a law firm, looking directly at me the whole time like I should feel ashamed. Grandpa Maddox asked Randy about his investment portfolio. Paula mentioned the cruise she and Lorenzo were planning and how nice it would be to have successful children who could afford to join them. Then Randy brought up the photos. He'd noticed too, obviously, and decided it would be hilarious to address it publicly. He said, Mom had done a great job with the redecorating. Really opened up the walls, got rid of all the clutter. Paula asked what clutter and Randy just gestured at me and said, "You know, the dead weight, the pictures of people who don't really contribute to the family anyway." Everyone laughed, not polite chuckles, real laughter. Mildred actually said it out loud, then said she and my dad had been going through old things and realized they were holding on to pictures of their biggest mistake. That it made more sense to celebrate the child who actually made them proud. She said it while passing the mashed potatoes. Just dropped that bomb like it was a fun fact about green beans. Paula decided this was the perfect time to announce that she and Lorenzo had been running a betting pool with some of the extended family about when I'd finally get the hint and stopped showing up to family events. She said it was up to 17 people now and the pot was at $400. Lorenzo said he had money on Christmas. Figured I was too stubborn to accept reality before then. Randy said he'd bet on me showing up to every single holiday for the next decade because I was too pathetic to build my own family and had to cling to this one. Grandpa Maddox, the guy who taught me how to fish and helped me with my college applications and who I genuinely thought cared about me, looked right at me and said they should have stopped at one kid. Said Randy turned out perfect and I was just proof that you shouldn't push your luck. Then he actually raised his glass like he was making a toast and everyone raised theirs too except me because what the actual hell do you even do in that moment? I sat there for maybe 30 seconds just looking at all of them. My mother, my brother, my aunt and uncle, my grandfather, all of them smiling, enjoying themselves, absolutely comfortable with what they just said. And I realized this was it. This was the moment I'd been building toward for 15 years. The moment where they showed me so clearly, so obviously that they genuinely didn't value me as a human being, that I wasn't overreacting or being too sensitive or misunderstanding family dynamics. They literally explicitly wanted me gone. So I smiled. I actually smiled at them. Then I stood up, picked up my plate, walked it to the kitchen, scraped it into the trash, and washed it in the sink. I grabbed the kitchen trash bag, tied it up, and took it out to the garage bins. I collected my overnight bag from by the front door, put on my coat, and walked out to my car while they all sat there at the table looking confused. Randy called after me asking where I was going, and I told him I was taking out the trash like I always did. Then I got in my car and drove the 6 hours back home. Here's the thing, though, and this is what I need Reddit to understand because it's important. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't devastated. I wasn't crying on the drive home or having some breakdown about family rejection. I was relieved. I was actually excited because they'd finally done it. They'd finally said out loud in front of witnesses with complete clarity exactly what they thought of me. No more ambiguity. No more gaslighting about how I was too sensitive or took jokes wrong. They'd put it all on the table. And now I could do what I'd been planning for over a decade. See, my family doesn't know certain things about me. They don't know that when I was 19 and my dad's business was failing, I was the one who co-signed on the refinancing of their house because my credit was better than Ree's and they needed a family member's signature. They don't know that I've been making supplemental mortgage payments for the last 8 years routed through a separate account. So, it just looked like they were getting help from the bank's hardship program. They don't know that when Ree's medical sales job does well, it's because I built him a client database and contact management system that he thinks he paid some freelancer for, but actually I did for free and maintained for him. They don't know that Paula and Lorenzo's retirement account is connected to an investment group that I have administrative access to through my company's financial services partnership. They don't know that Grandpa Maddox's assisted living facility, the nice one he moved into 3 years ago that he thinks his veterans benefits are covering, is actually partially subsidized by a fund I set up. They don't know that I've spent 15 years quietly, invisibly making sure they all had comfortable lives while they treated me like garbage. Specifically so that when this moment came, I'd have leverage. And now that moment is here. I got home Friday morning around 2 a.m. exhausted but wired and started making phone calls. Not to them, to banks, to account managers, to the assisted living facilities billing department, to the company that manages Ree's client system. I spent Black Friday doing what I do best, which is managing complex technical and financial arrangements. Except this time, I was dismantling them instead of maintaining them. By Saturday afternoon, my phone was blowing up. Texts from Mildred asking if I'd made it home safe, which was rich considering she just called me her biggest mistake 48 hours earlier. Voicemails from Paula asking if I was upset about something because Lorenzo thought maybe I'd taken the jokes too seriously. A message from Randy saying, Mom was worried and I should call her. Nothing from Grandpa Maddox because he doesn't text, but I'm sure he'd have called if he'd known what was coming. I didn't respond to any of them. Just kept making my calls, sending my emails, filing my paperwork, professional, calm, methodical. The way you execute a plan, you've been preparing for 15 years. Sunday morning, My doorbell rang at 6 a.m. Then someone started pounding on the door. Then I heard Mildred's voice outside yelling my name, begging me to open the door, saying they needed to talk right now. I looked through the peephole and saw her, Randy, and Paula all standing in my hallway looking panicked. I didn't open the door, just went back to my laptop and continued working. They've been back 4 times since then. Last night, they showed up at 2 a.m. All of them, including Lorenzo and even Grandpa Maddox, who doesn't drive at night anymore, so someone must have brought him. They were pounding on the door, crying, yelling about family and mistakes and misunderstandings. Mildred kept saying they were joking, that I was destroying them, that I couldn't do this to my own family. Randy was threatening to call the police if I didn't open the door, then switching to begging, then back to threatening. I'm writing this at my kitchen table while listening to them outside trying to figure out if I'm home. They don't know I can hear them. They don't know I'm sitting here drinking coffee and watching everything I built for them collapse exactly the way I designed it to. And the best part, I haven't even started yet. This is just the first wave. Just them realizing that maybe possibly they've made a terrible mistake. They don't even know what I'm actually capable of yet. So yeah, that's where I am. They spent Thanksgiving telling me I was their biggest mistake. And now they're outside my apartment at 2 a.m. sobbing about how I'm destroying the family. And honestly, I've never felt more at peace with a decision in my entire life. Update 1. Okay, so I know a lot of you told me to keep ignoring them and just let everything play out. And trust me, I appreciate that advice. But here's the thing about revenge that nobody tells you. The best part isn't watching them suffer from a distance. It's watching them try to justify what they did while their whole world collapses. And yeah, I know some of you are thinking I'm being too harsh or whatever, but stick with me because this gets so much better and so much worse at the same time. First, let me address the comments asking what exactly I did. I'm not going to get into super specific details because I don't need this used against me somehow, but basically, remember how I said I co-signed their house refinancing when I was 19? That also means I'm legally on the deed as a part owner. When I stopped making those supplemental mortgage payments I'd been routing through that separate account, their monthly payment jumped by almost $800 immediately and they're already stretched thin because my dad's business never really recovered and Mildred works part-time retail. Re's client management system. I built it with an admin backdoor because I'm not an idiot. Friday morning, I logged in and changed all his client contact information by 1 digit. Just 1. Enough that when he tries to call his biggest accounts this week, he's going to get wrong numbers. His December sales are going to tank, and he won't even understand why until he figures out the system is corrupted. And good luck explaining to your sales manager why you suddenly can't reach any of your clients right before year-end bonuses. Paula and Lorenzo's retirement account wasn't anything illegal. I just had administrative access through my company's financial partnership network. I removed myself from the authorization list and flagged some concerns about account verification. Now, their account is frozen pending a full review, which takes about 45 business days. They're 62 and 64. They were planning to retire next year. That timeline just got very complicated. Grandpa Maddox's assisted living fund. I closed it. The facility called him Monday morning to discuss payment arrangements for next month. He's been living there thinking his veteran benefits covered everything. Spoiler alert, they don't. Not even close. So that's what I did over Black Friday weekend while they were presumably eating leftover turkey and telling themselves I'd overreacted to their hilarious jokes. And Monday is when everything started getting really interesting because they weren't just panicking anymore. They were trying to explain. I was at my apartment Monday morning around 10 o'clock when my building's front desk called up. Someone had sent a massive flower arrangement, like absurdly large, the kind you send to a funeral or a hospital. The card said, "From your family who loves you more than you know." I told the desk to donate it to the senior center down the street. 20 minutes later, another arrangement arrived. Then another. By noon, there were 6 flower deliveries that I refused to accept. Then Randy showed up at my office. Yeah, my office. I don't know how he got past building security, but suddenly my desk phone rang and my assistant Dawn was telling me my brother was in the lobby demanding to see me. I told her to tell him I was in meetings all day. She came back 5 minutes later and said he was refusing to leave and was starting to cause a scene. Here's where I made my first strategic decision to actually engage because I needed to see where his head was at. I went down to the lobby and Randy was there in his expensive suit looking exhausted. And the second he saw me, he started in on this whole speech about how he'd been up all night thinking about Thanksgiving and he realized maybe they'd gone too far with the jokes. Maybe gone too far. Those were his exact words. I just looked at him and asked if he was here to apologize or to ask me to fix whatever financial problem he was dealing with. He got defensive immediately. Said he didn't need my help with anything. His business was fine. And why was I being so dramatic about what was clearly just family banter? I told him his client system was corrupted and he should probably look into that. Watched his face go pale. Then I walked back to the elevators. He followed me talking fast about how mom was devastated and maybe I didn't understand that the photo thing was just about redecorating and nobody actually meant any of the stuff they said at dinner. I stopped and turned around and asked him directly. Did he mean it when he said I was too pathetic to build my own family? Did Paula mean it about the betting pool? Did mom mean it when she called me her biggest mistake? Randy got quiet for a second and then said I needed to understand the context, that I'd always been sensitive. That they'd learned to joke harder with me because I took everything so seriously. He said it wasn't personal. It was just how they communicated with me because I was different from the rest of them. Different. Like that explained everything. I asked him different how. He looked uncomfortable and said I knew what he meant. That I'd always been more emotional, more reactive, harder to connect with. That when we were kids, I was the one who cried when they teased me and made everything awkward. So they learned to just commit to the bit. That it had become family culture and nobody actually thought about it anymore. And here's what really got me. He genuinely seemed to think this was a reasonable explanation. Like, oh, we psychologically abused you for decades because you reacted to psychological abuse, so really this is kind of your fault for being emotional about it. The logic was insane. I told him I wanted him out of my office building or I'd have security remove him. He switched tactics, then said mom and dad were going to lose the house if I didn't help them with the mortgage. I asked why that was my problem. He said because I was on the deed and if the house went into foreclosure, it would destroy my credit too. I just smiled and told him I'd already talked to a real estate attorney about transferring my portion of ownership. He looked like I'd punched him. Started saying I couldn't do that. It was legally complicated. They'd fight it. I told him to go ahead and try. That I had documentation of every payment I'd made for 8 years and could easily prove I'd been providing financial support that they'd never acknowledged or appreciated. That a judge would probably be very interested in how they had treated me while I was subsidizing their lifestyle. Randy left after that, but the dam had broken. That afternoon, I got a call from Paula, and look, I probably should have just let it go to voicemail, but I was curious what her angle would be. She started with asking if I was okay, which was rich coming from someone who'd announced a betting pool on when I'd stopped coming to family events. I didn't say anything, just waited. She pivoted to saying Lorenzo was stressed about their retirement account being frozen. And could I look into it since I worked in tech and understood these things? Not an apology, not an acknowledgement, just immediately asking me to fix the problem I'd created. I asked her if she remembered what she said at Thanksgiving dinner. She got defensive and said it was just a joke, that everyone knew it was a joke and I was being ridiculous holding on to it like this. I asked her who was in the betting pool. She went quiet. I asked again. She said it was just her and Lorenzo and maybe a couple of cousins and they'd been drinking and it was the kind of dumb thing people say at holidays that doesn't mean anything. I asked her if she'd taken my money, if the pool was real. She admitted it was real, but insisted it was all in good fun. That I'd always been too sensitive about family stuff. There it was again. Too sensitive. Like the problem was my reaction to their behavior, not their actual behavior. I told Paula that her retirement account situation was between her and her financial institution, and I couldn't help her. She started getting upset, saying I was punishing her for something stupid, that she was my aunt, and she'd been there my whole life. I reminded her that she'd literally announced at Thanksgiving that they had a betting pool on when I'd abandoned the family. She said that wasn't what she meant. I asked her what she did mean then. She couldn't answer. Just kept saying it came out wrong, that I was taking it too literally, That family is supposed to be able to joke around without everyone getting offended. I told her I hoped the retirement review went smoothly and hung up. Tuesday morning, Mildred showed up at my apartment at 7 a.m. I heard her knocking and checked the peephole. She was alone holding a photo album. I didn't open the door, but she knew I was home because my car was in its spot, so she just started talking through the door. She said she'd been going through old albums and found pictures of me as a baby, as a toddler, and she wanted me to know that she did love me, that she'd always loved me. But things had gotten complicated over the years. She was crying. I could hear it in her voice. And part of me wanted to open the door because it's your mom standing outside crying. But I kept thinking about those torn photos in the garbage. She said, Dad was having panic attacks about the mortgage, and could I please just talk to them? That whatever I was angry about, they could work through it. But I couldn't just cut them off financially without warning. I opened the door then, not because I felt bad, but because I needed her to see my face when I said what I was about to say. I told her I'd been making those mortgage payments for 8 years. And she'd never once thanked me, never acknowledged it. She looked confused and said she didn't know about that Dad handled the finances. I didn't believe her, but it didn't matter. I asked her if she meant it when she said I was her biggest mistake. She opened her mouth and closed it and then said it wasn't like that. That she'd been trying to be funny, that Randy had started the joke and everyone was laughing and she just went with it. I asked her why she tore up my photos. She said she didn't, that Dad had been cleaning and probably just threw out duplicates. I told her I saw them in the trash, ripped up, every single photo of me destroyed. She started crying harder and said maybe Dad was frustrated, that things had been tense, that I had to understand the pressure they were under. And there it was. Maybe Dad was frustrated. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement that destroying photos of your child is psychotic behavior. Just an excuse, just context, just me needing to understand. I asked her why they treated me differently than Randy. She got very quiet and then said I wasn't different, that they loved both their sons equally, but Randy had always been easier. Easier to parent, easier to be proud of, easier to talk about with friends. She said it like it was just a fact of nature, like some kids are tall and some are short and some are easier to love. I told her she needed to leave. She begged me to reconsider whatever I was doing with their finances. I closed the door. She stood outside for another 10 minutes, crying before she finally left. Here's what I learned from all these conversations. They genuinely don't think they did anything wrong. Or if they do, they think the wrongness is so minor compared to my reaction that I'm the one being unreasonable. They think calling me their biggest mistake and tearing up my photos and running betting pools about when I'll leave is just family dynamics. Just how they communicate. Just jokes that I'm too sensitive to handle. And now they're panicking because the sensitive son they've been mocking for 30 years turned out to be the one holding their entire financial stability together. And they never even noticed until it was gone. Wednesday morning, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Turned out to be Grandpa Maddox calling from the assisted living facility's main office because I'd blocked his cell. He said we needed to talk about his living situation, that there had been some kind of mistake with his payments. I told him there was no mistake. He asked what I meant and I explained that I'd been covering part of his cost for 3 years through a subsidy fund I'd set up and I'd closed that fund. He was silent for a long time and then asked why I would do that. I asked him if he remembered what he said at Thanksgiving. He said he'd said a lot of things. He was an old man and he jokes around. I asked him specifically if he remembered saying they should have stopped at 1 kid. More silence. Then he said I was really going to punish him over that. That he'd fought in Vietnam and raised a family and I was going to let him lose his housing over a stupid comment. I told him his veteran benefits would cover basic housing at the facility, just not the upgraded suite with the private bathroom and the social activities. That he'd be fine, just less comfortable. He started yelling then, saying I was being cruel, that he was 83 years old and I was his grandson and how dare I do this to him. I asked him again if he meant what he said. He said no, of course not. But that didn't mean I got to hold it over his head forever. I told him he'd have to figure out his living arrangements and hung up. Blocked the facility's main number too. By Wednesday afternoon, Ree's girlfriend, Wendy, had apparently heard enough from him about our family drama that she decided to get involved. She sent me a long text message saying she'd been dating Randy for 2 years and had never met me, which now made a lot more sense given what Randy had told her about Thanksgiving. She said she'd told Randy what he and his family had done was horrible and that he needed to fix it. But he kept insisting I was overreacting. Wendy said she wanted to meet me, talk to me directly, understand my side of things because Ree's version wasn't adding up. She suggested we get coffee somewhere neutral. And here's the thing. I was curious about Wendy because if she'd been dating Randy for 2 years and never met me, that meant he'd deliberately kept us separate. That meant he'd known on some level that his family's treatment of me was wrong enough that he didn't want his girlfriend to witness it. So, I agreed to meet her, which is how I ended up at a shopping mall food court Thursday afternoon, sitting across from my brother's girlfriend, who I'd never met, watching her face change as I explained exactly what had been happening for the last 15 years. And that's where I'm going to leave this update because what Wendy told me next opened up a whole new dimension to this situation that I wasn't expecting. And honestly, I'm still processing it. Let's just say Ree's been telling her a very different version of our family dynamic. And some of what he said makes him look even worse than I thought possible. More soon. This is getting complicated in ways I didn't plan for. Update 2. Alright, so I left off saying Wendy had information that changed things. And yeah, I wasn't exaggerating. Before I get into what she told me though, I need to address some comments from the last update because apparently I needed to clarify something. I'm not doing this to be vindictive or petty. This is about consequences. Natural, logical consequences for 30 years of systematic emotional abuse that I subsidized financially while they told me I was worthless. Some of you get it. Some of you think I should just move on. To those people genuinely, what part of they called me their biggest mistake while I was paying their mortgage sounds like something you just move on from. Anyway, Thursday afternoon mall food court, which I picked specifically because it's public and neutral. And if this turned into some kind of ambush, I could just leave. Wendy showed up right on time, and I'll admit, I'd been curious what kind of person would date Randy for 2 years. She seemed normal, mid-20s, worked in dental hygiene, seemed genuinely uncomfortable about the whole situation. We sat down and she started by saying she felt weird even being there because technically she was going behind Ree's back. But after hearing what happened at Thanksgiving, she couldn't just stay out of it. She said Randy had told her his family had a big fight and I'd stormed out over nothing, that I was being dramatic as usual. Those words, as usual, like this was a pattern she'd been hearing about. I asked her what Randy had told her about me in general over the 2 years they'd been together. She got quiet and then admitted he'd basically painted me as the family problem. Said I was jealous of him, that I'd always been competitive and resentful that he was more successful, that I made family gatherings awkward with my attitude, that I'd been like this since we were kids and the family had learned to just manage around me. She said Randy told her I lived alone and didn't really have friends because I pushed people away, that I'd always been socially difficult, that the family tried to include me, but I made everything about me. She said when she asked why she'd never met me, Randy told her I refused to meet his girlfriends because I couldn't handle him being happy, that I'd apparently ruined relationships for him before by being hostile to women he dated. I just sat there listening to this character assassination, and honestly, I wasn't even surprised. Of course, Randy had built a whole narrative where I was the villain. Of course, he'd spent 2 years making sure Wendy never questioned why I was never around. What got me though was when she said Randy told her I was financially irresponsible and had borrowed money from the family multiple times that I never paid back and that's why they were frustrated with me. I asked her to repeat that. She looked embarrassed but confirmed it. Randy had explicitly told her that I owed our parents money and refused to pay it back and that it was causing tension. I pulled out my phone and showed her my banking app. Scrolled through 8 years of mortgage payment confirmations going to my parents' address. Showed her the receipts from the assisted living facility payments. Showed her the invoices from Building Re's client management system that I'd marked as paid, but never actually charged him for. Wendy's face changed as she looked through everything. She kept saying, "Oh my God, oh my God." And I told her she could take pictures of anything she wanted because I needed someone in Re's life to know the actual truth. She asked why I'd been paying for all of this if they treated me so badly. I explained about co-signing when I was 19, about feeling responsible, about thinking if I just helped enough eventually they'd appreciate me, about being young and stupid and desperate for family approval. Then I told her what they said at Thanksgiving. All of it. The betting pool, the photos in the trash, Mom calling me her biggest mistake. Grandpa saying they should have stopped at one kid. Everything. Wendy actually teared up, which was weird because she doesn't even know me. But I guess hearing about someone's family destroying them over turkey dinner hits different when you've been told that person is the problem. She said she needed to talk to Randy, that this wasn't okay, that he'd lied to her about something major. I told her to be careful because Randy was going to spin this, too. And sure enough, about 2 hours later, I got a series of increasingly angry texts from my brother. The text started with him asking why I was trying to turn his girlfriend against him. Then asking what lies I told Wendy, then telling me I was sabotaging his relationship because I couldn't stand to see him happy. Then threatening to come to my apartment and confront me directly. I didn't respond to any of them, just screenshot them all and saved them. Friday morning, Randy showed up at my apartment building at 6 a.m. Building security called up and I told them not to let him up, that he wasn't welcome. Randy apparently lost it in the lobby. Started yelling about how I was destroying his life, how Wendy was questioning everything now because of my lies. Security had to escort him out. He called me 17 times in the next hour. I didn't answer. Instead, I got a call from my dad for the first time in this whole mess. He'd stayed conspicuously silent through everything else, letting Mildred do all the begging. But apparently, Randy had gone to them and told them I was trying to break up his relationship. Dad said I needed to stop whatever I was doing immediately. That messing with Ree's personal life crossed a line. I asked him what line exactly. He said family doesn't sabotage family. That whatever issues I had with them, Ree's relationship was off limits. I reminded him that Randy had told his girlfriend I was financially irresponsible and owed the family money when the exact opposite was true. Dad went quiet and then said Randy was probably just venting. That people say things when they're frustrated and I was taking it too seriously like I always did. There it was again. I asked Dad if he knew I'd been making mortgage payments for 8 years. He said he knew someone had been helping them through a hardship program. I told him that someone was me, that I'd been routing payments through a separate account specifically so they wouldn't feel awkward about accepting help from me. He asked why I would do that without telling them. I asked why he tore up my photos. He said he didn't tear up anything, that Mildred must have been cleaning and gotten carried away. That I was fixating on something meaningless instead of focusing on the real problem, which was that their house was going into foreclosure. I asked him if he remembered what Grandpa Maddox said at Thanksgiving. He said Grandpa was old and didn't mean anything by it. I asked if he remembered what Mildred said about me being their biggest mistake. He said she was trying to be funny and it came out wrong. Every single excuse, every single justification, never once an apology or acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, they'd been systematically cruel to me for my entire life. I told Dad I was done with this conversation and hung up. He called back immediately. I blocked his number. Saturday, things escalated in a way I genuinely hadn't anticipated. Paula and Lorenzo showed up at my apartment with Mildred and Dad. 4 of them standing outside my door at 8 a.m. knocking and asking me to please just talk to them. I didn't open the door, but I could hear everything they were saying through it. Paula started by saying their retirement account was still frozen and they'd called every number they could find and nobody could help them and could I please just make a phone call. I didn't respond. Lorenzo said they'd worked for 40 years and I was jeopardizing their entire future over a stupid comment Paula made while drinking. I stayed silent. Then Mildred chimed in saying they'd gotten a foreclosure notice, that they had 90 days to catch up on payments or they'd lose the house, that Dad's business was barely breaking even and they couldn't afford the new mortgage amount, that I was going to make them homeless. Dad added that they'd raised me, fed me, clothed me, put me through college, and this was how I repaid them. I opened the door then. All 4 of them looked relieved until they saw my face. I asked Dad if he really wanted to talk about who paid for what. He said that's not what he meant. The parents don't keep score with their children. I told him I'd paid them over $60,000 in mortgage support over 8 years and they'd never once acknowledged it, thanked me, or apparently even realized it was me. Paula tried to interrupt, saying this wasn't about money. This was about family. I asked her how much was in the betting pool. She said that didn't matter. I said it mattered to me. Lorenzo said I was being childish, holding on to grudges, making everything harder than it needed to be. I asked him if he thought announcing a betting pool about when I'd abandoned the family was childish. He said I was twisting things. Mildred started crying again, asking what she needed to do to fix this, saying she'd apologize 1,000 times if that's what I wanted. I asked her if she meant it when she called me her biggest mistake. She said no, of course not. She loved me. She'd always loved me. But she'd been angry and frustrated and said something she didn't mean. I asked her what she'd been angry and frustrated about. She couldn't answer. Dad tried a different approach. Said fine. Maybe they'd all made mistakes, but I was making bigger ones now by destroying the whole family over words. That actions matter more than words. And my actions were proving I never really cared about them at all. I told him he was absolutely right, that actions matter more than words, and their actions for 30 years had been to treat me like I was worthless while I kept them financially afloat. Paula said I was being dramatic, calling it 30 years. I asked her when it started. Then when did the family jokes about me being different and difficult and too sensitive begin? She said that's just normal sibling stuff that I was retroactively turning into abuse. I asked if it was normal sibling stuff when Randy told his girlfriend I was financially irresponsible and borrowed money I never paid back. Mildred looked shocked and asked if Randy really said that. I told her to ask him herself. They left after that, but the whole thing confirmed what I'd already known. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry it had consequences. They still thought the problem was my reaction, not their behavior. They still thought if they just explained enough, justified enough, contextualized enough, I'd understand and forgive and fix everything. Sunday morning, I got a Facebook message from a cousin I haven't talked to in like 5 years, Ethan, asking if I was okay and saying he'd heard the family was having problems. I asked who told him. He said Paula had called his mom and told her I was having some kind of breakdown and cutting everyone off and could family members please reach out to me. So now they were trying to mobilize extended family to pressure me. I told Ethan the truth that the family had spent Thanksgiving telling me I was a mistake and I decided to stop financially supporting people who hated me. He asked if I was serious. I sent him screenshots of some of the texts and messages I'd gotten. He stopped responding. Monday morning, Ree's work situation apparently imploded. I don't know all the details, but Dawn, my assistant, told me she'd gotten a call from someone claiming to be Ree's sales manager, asking if our company had done tech consulting work for their firm. Dawn transferred the call to me. And this manager, who sounded frustrated, asked if I'd built or had access to their client management system. I explained I'd built a private system for Randy personally, not for his company, and that I'd recently discovered some data corruption issues, and recommended he not rely on it. The manager asked if I'd corrupted it intentionally. I said I'd simply stopped maintaining a system I'd been maintaining for free, and apparently it had dependencies that Randy wasn't aware of. The manager thanked me and hung up. 2 hours later, Randy called me from a number I didn't have blocked. He was angrier than I'd ever heard him, saying I'd gotten him suspended pending an investigation into his client management practices, that his boss thought he'd been manipulating their data somehow, that I'd destroyed his career. I asked if he'd told his boss that the system was something I built privately and he'd been using without company authorization. He went quiet. See, Randy had apparently been presenting my client management system as something he'd developed himself, or at least something he had legitimate professional access to. He'd been using it to appear more organized and successful than his coworkers. And now his company was questioning whether he'd been appropriately managing sensitive client information. That wasn't something I'd planned, but I'm not going to pretend I'm upset about it. Randy said I'd crossed a line, that messing with his job was different from the family stuff. I asked him what line exactly, since he'd been lying to his girlfriend about me for 2 years and apparently taking credit for work I'd done. He said that was different, that I'd offered to help him and he just accepted the help. I asked if telling Wendy I was financially irresponsible and owed the family money counted as accepting help. He changed tactics. Said Wendy had broken up with him because of what I'd told her, that I'd sabotaged his relationship deliberately. I told him Wendy broke up with him because he'd lied to her about something major for 2 years and she realized she couldn't trust him. He said that's not what happened, that I'd poisoned her against him. I reminded him that all I'd done was show her bank statements proving his lies. Randy said I was tearing the family apart, that Mom and Dad might lose their house, that Paula and Lorenzo's retirement was destroyed, that Grandpa might have to move to a worse facility, that his career was in jeopardy, all because I couldn't take a joke. I asked him if he'd made a joke. He said, what I said at Thanksgiving when everyone was laughing about me being a mistake and betting on when I'd leave, was he joking? He said, obviously, they were all joking. I asked him what the punchline was. He couldn't answer, just kept saying I knew what he meant, that it was family dynamics, that everyone gives each other hard time, that I was selectively remembering things to justify my nuclear overreaction. I told him I was done talking and hung up. Tuesday morning, I got an email from a lawyer's office representing my parents. The email stated that they were disputing my ownership stake in their house and demanding I either resume mortgage payments or transfer my portion of the deed back to them for the original consideration. I forwarded it to my own lawyer who'd been expecting something like this. My lawyer called me an hour later laughing. Apparently, my parents' attorney hadn't realized how strong my position was. I had documentation of every payment, proof that I'd been told it was a hardship program when it was really me. Evidence that they'd never acknowledged or reciprocated my support. My lawyer said if they wanted to push this legally, we'd win, and they'd likely end up owing me back payment for 8 years of mortgage support I'd provided under false pretenses. I told my lawyer to send a formal response laying out exactly that and to include a deadline for when I expected reply. My lawyer said this was going to get worse before it got better. I told him that was the point because here's what my family still doesn't understand. I'm not reacting emotionally to Thanksgiving dinner. I'm executing a plan I've been building for over a decade. Every financial connection I maintained wasn't generosity. It was leverage. Every system I built wasn't help. It was a backdoor for exactly this moment. I've been preparing for this confrontation since I was 19 years old and realized my family would never value me no matter what I did. And now they're all scrambling, blaming me, trying to fix things while still refusing to actually acknowledge what they did wrong. They want me to restore everything while they keep explaining why I'm overreacting. They want the money and support back without having to actually apologize or change, but it's too late for that. The house of cards is falling, and I'm the one who built it specifically so I could knock it down when the time came. Next update is going to be the big one. Things are about to get significantly worse for everyone involved. Final update. Okay, so this is probably going to be my last update because everything has reached its conclusion and I need to move on with my life, which apparently means life without my biological family. And I'm completely fine with that. But before I close this chapter, I need to tell you what happened this week because the final confrontation answered the one question I've been asking for 30 years. Why did they always treat me differently? And the answer is so much worse than I expected. First, the legal stuff. My lawyer sent the response to my parents' attorney Wednesday morning, and by Wednesday afternoon, we got a reply that was basically them backing down completely. Turns out, when you have 8 years of documented payments, signed agreements showing you're on the deed, and evidence that you were providing financial support under the impression it was anonymous, you have a really strong legal position. My parents' lawyer apparently advised them that pursuing this would likely result in a judgment against them for the full amount I'd paid plus interest. My lawyer called me to discuss options and I told him I wanted to proceed with transferring my ownership stake, but I wanted full repayment for the mortgage support I'd provided. He said that would probably force them into bankruptcy or selling the house. I told him that was fine. He asked if I was sure I wanted to push it that far. I told him I'd been sure for 15 years. Thursday morning, all of them showed up at my apartment. And I mean all of them. Mildred, Dad, Randy, Paula, Lorenzo, even Grandpa Maddox, who I'm pretty sure shouldn't be driving, but apparently desperation makes people do unsafe things. They were outside my door at 7 a.m. demanding I let them in for a family meeting. I ignored them for about 20 minutes while I made coffee and checked my work emails, then finally opened the door. They filed into my living room, and I could see them taking in my apartment for the first time. Nice furniture, decent art on the walls, everything clean and organized. Randy actually looked around and made some comment about how I'd done well for myself, and Mildred immediately shushed him like that wasn't the point of being there. They all sat down except Dad, who stood by the window like he was too agitated to sit. Mildred started with saying they'd gotten my lawyer's response, and it was unacceptable that I couldn't seriously be demanding full repayment for help I'd volunteered to give. I asked her if she'd known it was me making those payments. She admitted she hadn't. I asked Dad. He said he'd suspected but never confirmed it. I asked why he never asked me directly. He said he didn't want to make me feel obligated to continue if he acknowledged it. That logic was insane. And I told him so. He said I wouldn't understand that accepting help from your younger son is complicated. That he had his pride. I asked him if his pride was worth more than my dignity. He didn't answer. Randy jumped in saying we were getting off track. That the real issue was I was trying to destroy the whole family over one bad dinner. Paula agreed. Said I was holding a grudge over something everyone had already apologized for, even though none of them had actually apologized. They just explained why I shouldn't be upset. Lorenzo said I needed to be realistic. That family is family and you don't just walk away over hurt feelings. I asked them if they wanted to know why I was really doing this. They all said yes, like I was finally going to explain my crazy overreaction. I told them I'd been planning this since I was 19 years old, since the day I co-signed their mortgage refinancing, and realized I had leverage, that every financial connection I'd maintained, every system I'd built, every bit of help I'd provided was specifically so that when the time came, I could take it all away and watch them scramble. Mildred looked horrified and said that couldn't be true, that I was rewriting history to justify my current behavior. I pulled out a journal I'd kept since I was 20. Pages and pages of documentation about every instance of them treating me like I was worthless. Every comment, every exclusion, every comparison to Randy. I'd been documenting it for a decade because I knew eventually they'd try to gaslight me into thinking I was imagining it. Dad asked why I would keep something like that. I told him because I knew this day would come. That I knew eventually they'd push me too far and I'd need proof that I wasn't crazy or oversensitive. That I'd need evidence that this had been happening my entire life. Grandpa Maddox said I was being dramatic, that all families tease each other, that I was acting like they'd abused me when really I just had my feelings hurt. I asked him if he remembered telling me they should have stopped at one kid. He said he'd already explained that was just a thoughtless comment. I asked him how many thoughtless comments over 30 years equal abuse. He said I was twisting things. That's when Randy made a mistake. He said, I'd always been like this. That even as kids, I was the one who couldn't take a joke, who made everything about me, who needed constant validation, that they'd learned to just accept that I was more difficult than other kids and adjust their expectations accordingly. And then he said the quiet part out loud. He said, at least now I was proving them right about me being the problem child. I asked him to explain that. He looked uncomfortable, but Paula picked up where he left off. She said I needed to understand that when I was born, I'd had some health issues as a baby. Nothing serious, but I'd needed extra attention for the first couple years. She said Mom and Dad had bonded more with Randy because he'd been easy, and by the time I was healthy and normal, the dynamic was already set, that Randy was the son and I was the other one. Mildred started crying and telling Paula to stop, but Paula kept going. Said the family had always known I was treated differently, but nobody wanted to address it because what were they supposed to do? Go back in time and recreate childhood? That it was just understood that Randy was the favorite and I needed to accept that some families have hierarchy. I sat there processing this and asked Mildred directly if that was true. She said it was more complicated than Paula made it sound. I asked her to uncomplicate it. She said that yes, she'd bonded with Randy more easily when he was a baby, and yes, that had created a pattern, but she'd always loved both her sons. I asked her if she loved us equally. She hesitated too long before answering. Dad finally spoke up and said they tried to treat us the same, but I'd always been more sensitive, more reactive, harder to connect with. That Randy was naturally social and easygoing, and I was more withdrawn and serious. That those personality differences meant they related to Randy better, and I should understand that's just how families work sometimes. I asked him if he thought it was fair that a child should just accept being the unfavorite. He said life isn't fair, and I needed to grow up and stop expecting everything to be equal. That plenty of people have siblings who are more successful or more liked, and they don't tear their families apart over it. Lorenzo added that I'd turned out fine despite not being the favorite, that I had a good job and my own place, so clearly the different treatment hadn't damaged me that much. Paula said I was being selfish, that my parents were going to lose their house, and I was okay with that because my feelings were hurt. Randy said I needed to separate the childhood stuff from the current situation. That even if they had treated me differently as kids, that didn't justify destroying their lives. Now, I asked him about lying to Wendy. He said that was a separate issue and I was deflecting. I asked him about taking credit for work I did. He said I'd offered to help and he'd accepted. That's not theft. Mildred tried a different approach. Said, even if everything I was saying was true, even if they had treated me differently my whole life, was I really going to let them lose everything over it? Was I really going to be that cruel? I asked her if calling me her biggest mistake was cruel. She said she'd explained that already, that it came out wrong, that she'd been trying to fit in with the joke everyone else was making. I asked why she needed to fit in with a joke about her own son being worthless. She didn't have an answer, just kept crying and saying this wasn't who she was, that she was a good mother, that I was making her into a villain. Grandpa Maddox said I was being vindictive, that revenge wasn't Christian, that family forgives family. I reminded him that he'd raised his glass in a toast to them having stopped at one kid. He said he was a jokester, always had been, that I knew that about him. I said, jokesters are supposed to be funny, and there was nothing funny about telling your grandson he shouldn't have been born. Paula's phone rang, and she stepped into my kitchen to take it. When she came back, she looked pale and said the retirement account review had been completed and there were irregularities that needed to be addressed in person. Lorenzo asked what kind of irregularities. She said they needed to go to the bank immediately. They left right then. Paula practically running out of my apartment. That's when Dad tried to make a deal. He said if I reinstated the mortgage payments and helped Randy fix his client system, they'd all agree to family therapy. They'd work on the dynamic, acknowledge they'd been unfair, actually try to fix things. I asked him why I would want to fix things with people who spent 30 years showing me I wasn't wanted. He said because I was proving them right. That by doing this I was showing I really was the vindictive, difficult son they'd always thought I was. I told him that was perfect logic. Treat someone badly for 3 decades. And when they finally fight back, use their fighting back as proof they deserve the bad treatment all along. Mildred asked what I wanted then. If I didn't want therapy or reconciliation. I told her I wanted them to understand that actions have consequences. That you can't spend someone's entire life treating them like they're worthless while that person is financially supporting you and then expect everything to continue when they decide they're done. Randy said I was talking like we'd been abusing me when really it was just normal family dynamics that I'd taken too personally. I asked him to define normal family dynamics. He said teasing, joking around, having favorites. I asked him if he'd be okay being the unfavorite. He said that was different because he wasn't as sensitive as me. I told all of them to leave. Mildred begged me to reconsider. Said they'd already lost so much that I was tearing the family apart. I reminded her that she'd literally told me at Thanksgiving that they'd redecorated to get rid of pictures of their biggest mistake. She said she'd never meant for me to take it that way. I asked what way she'd meant for me to take being called a mistake. Dad said they'd lawyer up properly if I didn't back down, that they'd fight me on the house, make my life difficult. I told him my lawyer was better than theirs, and I had documentation they didn't even know existed. He tried to argue, but Randy pulled him toward the door, clearly recognizing this wasn't going anywhere. Grandpa Maddox was the last to leave. He stopped at the door and said, "I'd regret this. That family is all you have in life, and I was throwing mine away over pride." I told him I was throwing them away over 30 years of systematic emotional neglect that I'd subsidized financially because I was stupid enough to think I could earn their love. He said, "That's not what happened." I closed the door. Friday morning, Ree's company fired him. Turns out when they investigated his client management system, they found he'd been storing sensitive client information on a private server without authorization and had been misrepresenting his capabilities by using systems he didn't actually control. His entire sales record was under review and they were considering legal action. He called me from yet another new number and just screamed. Said I'd destroyed his career, his relationship, his family, everything. I asked him if he'd told Wendy I was financially irresponsible and owed the family money. He said that was beside the point. I said it was exactly the point, that he'd spent 2 years lying about me and now he was facing consequences for lying about other things too. He said I was a psychopath, that normal people don't plan revenge for 15 years. I told him normal families don't have betting pools about when their son will stop coming to holidays. He hung up. Paula called that afternoon and said the bank had frozen all their accounts pending an investigation into some transfers they'd made. She said it was my fault that I'd flagged something that triggered a review. I told her I'd simply removed myself from their account authorization list and apparently that had prompted the bank to verify all account activity, which was standard procedure. She said they might lose everything. I said that sounded like a them problem. My parents' lawyer called my lawyer Monday morning with a settlement offer. They'd sign over the full deed to me if I'd forgive the mortgage support payments I'd made. My lawyer asked what I wanted to do. I told him I wanted full repayment or I'd force a sale of the house. He asked if I was sure. I said I'd never been more sure of anything. They have 30 days to arrange payment or the house goes on the market. Grandpa Maddox's assisted living facility has moved him to a smaller room that his actual benefits cover. Paula and Lorenzo's retirement accounts are still under review, but they've pulled what they could and downsized from their house to a condo. Randy is working retail while he looks for another sales position without the references he needs. And me, I'm sitting in my apartment that I own outright with a job I'm good at. Finally, free of the people who spent 30 years making me feel worthless while I kept them comfortable. Some of you are going to say I went too far. Some will say they deserved worse. Honestly, I don't care either way. They had 30 years to treat me like I mattered. They chose not to. They had 2 weeks after Thanksgiving to genuinely apologize and acknowledge what they'd done. They chose to explain and justify and tell me I was overreacting instead. Every single consequence they're facing now is the direct result of decisions they made. I'm done being the son who wasn't enough. Done being the mistake they kept around because I was useful. Done subsidizing the comfortable lives of people who celebrated my absence. They wanted me gone. They got their wish. They just didn't realize I was the foundation everything else was built on. The betting pool question got answered, by the way. I left and Paula apparently won $400 right before her retirement accounts got frozen. I hope she enjoys it. To everyone who's been following this, thanks for listening. Sometimes you need strangers on the internet to confirm you're not crazy for being angry about being treated like garbage your whole life. Some of you suggested I should forgive them. Move on. Be the bigger person. But here's the thing about being the bigger person. It usually just means accepting bad treatment to make other people comfortable. I spent 30 years being the bigger person. I'm done now. And that's the story from Hidden Lies.